Well, hello dragons, and welcome to this instructional video for Lesson 9, Part 3, Economic Growth. The main idea behind this economics lesson is economic growth refers to long-term overall improvements in a nation's economy and standard of living. With that in mind, by the end of watching this video, you'll be able to explain why economic growth is important, identify the requirements of economic growth, and describe the relationship between economic growth and productivity. Now that the outcomes for this lesson have been shared with you, let's get started. As noted in the previous video, economic activity fluctuates in business cycles. These expansions and contractions usually represent short-term changes in the economy. Economic growth, however, refers to long-term overall improvements in the economy. For example, consider the Canes High School basketball team, the Wizards. Throughout the season, they experience both winning and losing streaks. By the end of the season, however, they have won far more games than they have lost, and consider it a winning season. Similarly, even though the economy may fluctuate in short-term ups and downs, as long as the ups are more frequent, the economy will experience growth. As a nation's economy grows, its capacity to produce goods and services increases. Thus, this economic growth is defined as the increase in the output of final goods and services produced within a nation's borders over a specified period of time. That is, an increase in a nation's real GDP over time. To account for population increase, economists usually measure economic growth in terms of per capita increase in real GDP. Real GDP per capita is an increase in the real dollar value of all final goods and services that are produced per person for a specified period of time. As noted in Lesson 6, economic growth is one of the 6 major goals of the U.S. economy. Continued economic growth is important to the welfare of the United States for a number of reasons: to maintain a high standard of living, to compete effectively in global markets, and to provide the resources to deal with domestic problems. Without long-term economic growth, a nation's standard of living declines. The standard of living, the economic well-being of a nation's people, improves when production per person increases faster than the total population. Thus, people have more money to spend, an increased supply of goods and services to choose from, and the means to enjoy more leisure time. On the other hand, a decrease in the number of available goods and services results in a decline in the standard of living. A higher standard of living can benefit society in many ways. People do not have to devote so many hours to work and have more time to spend on family, travel, and entertainment. In addition, people have more time to spend helping their community and can better afford to volunteer their time. More money in the economy also may help lessen domestic problems such as poverty, crime, and lack of health care, all of which are associated with low incomes. Keep in mind, however, that an increase in a nation's real GDP per capita is not a true measure of that nation's standard of living. Real GDP does not measure quality of life or differentiate between goods and bads, and it says nothing about the distribution of income across the population. Obviously, if most material possessions are in the hands of only a few people, then many people are not experiencing a high standard of living. Nevertheless, real GDP per capita does provide a good approximation of a nation's standard of living. During the 20th century, the United States was the leading economic world power among industrialized nations in terms of GDP. To maintain this position, however, it must continue to experience economic growth. Although the U.S. economy leads the world in overall production levels, the economies of some other nations are growing at a faster rate. Another benefit of economic growth is an expanded tax base. As people's incomes increase, they generally pay more in taxes. Thus, the government can spend more money on national defense, education, fire protection and police services, and other important services such as welfare and job training programs. In addition, the government can devote more money to reducing the federal deficit. Alternatively, the government might lower taxes. As you can see, economic growth is essential to the strength and prosperity of a nation and its people. Thus, macroeconomists devote a great deal of time to examining ways to stimulate the economy. In order to devise policies that promote growth, economists first examine the factors that contribute to growth. For a nation to increase its long-term output and income, it must either increase its inputs, its factors of production, or increase the productivity of these inputs. Policies designed to promote economic growth usually seek to increase both available resources and productivity levels in combination. The United States possesses a wealth of natural resources. Businesses in the United States, for example, have access to plentiful amounts of timber, coal, natural gas, and minerals. Despite this wealth of natural resources, however, the United States still must import many resources, such as oil and diamonds. As a result, economic growth in the United States is, to a certain extent, dependent on the state of international markets and politics, conditions that can change with little warning. Therefore, it is important that the existing resources be protected, particularly those that cannot be replenished or restocked. When estimating a nation's capacity to produce goods and services, economists examine the amount of labor input that is available. Labor input is the size of the employed labor force multiplied by the length of the average work week. Although the average work week has decreased in length significantly since the early 1900s, the size of the labor force has increased. This increase has been a result of dramatic population growth and more women and minorities joining the labor force. Increasing the total stock of capital goods increases total production. The more farmland, machines, factories, and production plants in a nation, the more it is likely to produce and the more its economy will grow. A workforce that has access to plentiful supplies of modern, quality equipment and facilities is generally more productive and more efficient. Just as a high level of investment in capital goods promotes expansion in the business cycle, it also leads to long-term economic growth. The relationship between capital stock and economic growth is examined in further detail later in this video. The willingness of entrepreneurs to take the risks involved in starting new businesses and creating and selling new products is vital to economic growth. These entrepreneurs create new products, new markets, and new jobs, all of which will contribute to increased output and demand. Policies that make it easier for entrepreneurs to start new businesses and to compete successfully in the marketplace help a nation's economy grow. At the same time, the new goods and services that entrepreneurs provide give consumers more choices and improve the overall standard of living. When estimating and determining ways to increase a nation's capacity to produce goods and services, economists often focus on labor productivity. Labor productivity is a measure of how much each worker produces in a given period of time, usually 1 hour. Economists define productivity growth as an increase in the output of each worker per hour of work. The factors that have a significant impact on productivity growth are level of available technology, quantity of capital goods available per worker, and education and skill level of the labor force. Invention and innovation, new knowledge and new ways of applying this knowledge, are the leading sources of productivity growth. New ideas, methods, and tools increase efficiency and output and often lower costs. Research and development expenditures, or R&D, indicate the percentage of total GDP that a nation devotes to improving its technology. Another measure of productivity is the capital to labor ratio, or the amount of capital stock available per worker. This ratio is calculated by dividing the total amount of capital stock by the size of the workforce. When the amount of a nation's capital goods increases faster than the size of that nation's workforce, capital deepening, an increase in the amount of capital goods available per worker, results. Workers who have access to more and better capital goods, machines, tools, equipment, and work facilities, usually will produce more in less time. Thus, capital deepening results in increased labor productivity. The third influence on productivity is the education and skill level of the labor force. As trade becomes more global and people become more mobile, workers entering the labor force face greater and stiffer competition for jobs. In addition, as the level of skill required to perform certain jobs increases, employees must continue to learn and to improve their skills to keep their jobs. For U.S. citizens to compete in the workplace, it is vital that the nation and its businesses invest in human resources through better education, improved access to college and vocational programs, and increased number of job training programs. Many factors other than education can affect productivity levels. The attitudes and motivation levels of workers, their dedication to their jobs, and the amount of loyalty they have to their companies directly affect productivity. Highly dedicated workers produce more, as do workers who enjoy their jobs. A larger percentage of the labor force working in highly productive fields also results in increased productivity. Industrialization provided many new jobs for U.S. workers. As more people went to work in industry, productivity increased. U.S. productivity growth has slowed since the mid-1960s. Moreover, in several of the countries that compete with the United States, productivity is increasing at a faster rate. Economists disagree as to why U.S. labor productivity is increasing at slower rates than in the past. Some of the more commonly cited reasons include decreased savings and investment, decreased investment in research and development, or R&D, increased government regulation, and the shift to a more service-oriented economy. Economists also disagree as to the best ways to stimulate economic growth in the United States. As mentioned before, policies designed to promote economic growth usually seek to increase both input and productivity. Different approaches and specific government policies for doing this are discussed in later videos. So that's the way it is with Lesson 9, Part 3, Economic Growth. At this point, you should know that economic growth is the increase in a nation's real GDP over time. Economists usually measure economic growth in terms of an increase in real GDP per capita to account for population growth, and economic growth requires an increase in either a nation's inputs or in the productivity of these inputs. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to have the entire catalog of economics videos available at your fingertips. Click the subscribe button and then click on the follow bell to receive notifications as to when the channel is updated. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in class, Dragons.